Welcome. This will be my video on 1994's Pulp Fiction. I'm going to start with a review that's going to have zero spoilers for this or anything else. And once I've covered that, I will get into what I call the thoughts section, where I spoil everything about the movie, not any other piece of media, unless I verbally warn before I do so. And yeah, I will let you know verbally before I get into that spoiler section, so you can watch the first. The review itself is completely safe to watch, even if you somehow never watched this movie. That's right, we are back to Pulp Fiction, to Tarantino theme. I am not getting enough sleep these days. Maybe it shows. And from here on out, I believe I should be able to do them in the order that they came out. Had to, yeah, couldn't do that 100% up to this point. So, I really love this movie. I'm acknowledging that there are issues with it. I'll try to discuss them to the best of my ability over the course of this video. But yeah, this is one of Tarantino's best. And the movie is rated R, so will this video be. And I suppose that does pretty much get us into the writing. So I'll admit, maybe I need more B movies in my diet. I understand that several of the ideas herein are found in like well-known B movies, and I guess I just haven't watched those. It felt fresh to me, but from what I understand, it's more that this is a very refined version of those setups. And yeah, there's a lot of psychological accuracy and authenticity. And, you know, it's not necessarily that it's set 100% in the real world. It's not as far from the real world as some of his work, but yeah. And while obviously there are, as mentioned, there are some issues, this is a movie that has things to say, and, you know, it doesn't always understand people quite as well as it thinks it does, but there is some really incredible stuff here, and it certainly, by and large, has its heart in the right place. It's not just trying to, you know, there are some people that this movie does not think very highly of. And the level of detail is immense. There's so many little world-building details, you know, character quirks and such that, you know, I've watched this movie dozens of times by now, and while I wouldn't say it's every single time, I would definitely say the first half a dozen, each time I would discover something new that helped enrich the experience. Tarantino has a quote. Basically, he once realized he was watching a movie where I think it was that the director didn't know where the train was going, or it was something along those lines, and he was like, the audience doesn't have to know. Maybe it's not relevant for the audience to know where the train is going, but the writer and or director should know where the train is going. And this is very much a case of that. Like, it's possible that, you know, I mean, this movie's over 30 years old. Maybe some of it he doesn't remember now. But if you asked, if you sat down with Quentin Tarantino for 5 hours and just asked him hundreds of questions about the characters, the events, everything in this movie, there might be minor things where it's like, I don't know, I didn't really think about that. But for so much of it, you can tell he knows the answer, and yeah, it really makes it so much more than otherwise. And that's one of the appeals of Tarantino's movies, because, you know, a lot of them, like, on paper, you would think, oh, this is a B movie, you know. And one of the things that sometimes makes B movies a little less, you know, engaging than, you know, I mean, we call them B movies for a reason, is the fact that a lot of them, you know, yeah, they didn't necessarily really think all of this stuff through. They just, you know, they wanted, or sometimes needed for money, to make something that, you know, did well. And that was pretty much, and to be clear, some of them are absolutely, you know, labors of love. Right, and I should definitely note, I'm going to try not to restate what I've said about Tarantino in other videos. A lot of what I would say about this one, I already said in my video on Reservoir Dogs. So I'm going to try really hard to not just restate. You know, I personally think I'm proud of that video. So, you know, if you want to hear what I have to say about Tarantino, I recommend that one. I'm going to try to focus on how this builds on that and where it is different. And yeah, the tone, there's this very impressive balance, because it really does, like, if somebody tried explaining this movie to you and you hadn't watched it, and maybe you didn't know Tarantino, you would never think it worked. Like, you might be with it for a while, and then at some point, the person explaining it to you would say something, and you'd be like, wait, what? I'm sorry, are we still talking about the same fucking movie? And somehow he makes it work, you know. And the, I think, yeah, I I don't think I'm gonna expand on it in the spoiler-free review, because some of this stuff you gotta see for yourself, and yeah, I'll discuss at least some of it in the thoughts section. Now, I think that does. Yeah, as usual, you know, the dialogue is amazing. This has some of the most quotable lines of any Tarantino movie. Many of the most quotable lines. I'd say every single one of his scripts has at least some really quotable, but yeah, this one, holy shit. And the delivery is yet again absolutely on point. And it's, I think, also worth noting, this might be, I don't know if it still is, but for a while this was the most referenced Tarantino movie. You know, if you look at, you know, Simpsons did multiple references to Tarantino, and yeah, they especially focused on this particular, you know, perhaps most in, see, I don't actually remember if that's what it's called, but when you start watching it, it's like, it pops up with this thing that says like 20-ish stories in Springfield or something like that, you know. And yeah, that entire episode is very pulpy and fictional. Now, the direction, this was a place where he really showed he had learnt from, you know, I maintain he did a really solid job, very, very impressive on Reservoir Dogs, but it was the debut. And you could tell on this one, you know, there were certain things where he appreciates a little better how you handle certain, yeah. I should also note, I am not trying to, like, auteur theory this. I am well aware, you know, no one person makes a full-on movie. Like, there's short films that were made by, like, literally one person, but once you got, like, a feature film, no, there's, you know, I'm absolutely not giving Tarantino credit for everything that works here. But yeah, one of the things that really works well here is that where essentially So I appreciate that these were not the only two movies he had made by the time this came out, but these were the two that he directed himself. And, there were certain changes made. I actually forget if, I believe this was 1994 was the same, in addition to Pulp Fiction, it was the same year as um, Natural Born Killers, but that movie was changed so much that he demanded his name be taken off. And yeah, other than that, really the only, one to compare to is True Romance, which is very much, you can really see his fingerprints on there. But that one is also in part very much a, Tony Scott movie. But yeah, in Reservoir Dogs, a lot of the characters, they tend to be men, and while not all of them are like criminals, they are relating to that. The ones who aren't criminals might be like law enforcement or the like. I'm not spoiling that movie, but that's the tendency in that movie. If you meet a character and spend some time with them, they are likely to be one of those two. And this one is still about, the world of crime, but there is more variety to the characters here. And, more diversity in multiple, there's female characters, there are characters who are not white, and I'm just glad that this was made before the YouTube and other grifters decided that, movies are all woke, which I think was like 2016, because now not everyone who busts ghosts is a man. Yeah, that's Jesus fucking Christ. It must be wonderful to have literally no actual problems. Seriously though, they are obviously, everyone has problems, but they like to ignore theirs or blame other people who are not at fault for them, including minorities. I'm not saying their problems are self-made, but they are made worse by their refusal to look at fucking reality. Anyway, I think that more or less covers the yeah. So this is also one of the first times that he did multiple storylines in one movie, and that is a big part of what works so well here. Reservoir Dogs, in a way, feels like... Right, and to be clear, I still fucking love that movie. I am not taking back any positive I said in my video on that movie. That movie, in some ways, felt like Tarantino kind of going with, well, what could I get a big enough budget that I could actually, and cast that locations and such, that I could actually fucking do. Let's try to be realistic here. And with this one, it was like, you know what? Reservoir Dogs did really well. Why don't you just go fucking nuts? And yeah, like it really is one of his best. And I have made the decision that I'm only going to rank his movies worst to best once I have gone through, I'm not doing new videos on the ones that I did when they first came out, but I am, I think then, let's see, what was the most recent that I haven't done? I think it might be, let's see. Can I see it from here? I can't quite see it from... Oh, yeah. Inglourious Basterds. That's right. Inglourious Basterds. Once I have done a video on that one, I will, I'm probably going to put it at the end of that video, my full ranking, worst to best of all those movies. And part of that is the fact that I still haven't watched Death Proof, but I do own it now. It was on sale, and yeah, in months to come. You can probably count. I'm probably going to do both of the Kill Bills. Let's see. March? I feel like that's the month. Right, for some reason I can't fucking remember right now, but Women's History Month is when I'll do both of those for very obvious reasons. And the other than that, it's going to be one per month until I've done all. So yeah, that's part of the reason why I'm not doing the ranking yet. I wouldn't be able to include Death Proof. And another part is, and I'm going to be perfectly honest here, some of these movies, it's been too long since I watched, and I don't think I would be able to do a good enough job ranking them fairly. So once I've rewatched, that's when the ranking will, But this really does show a very firm grip on the storytelling aspect, because I have shown this movie to maybe half a dozen people. And while there were times where we needed to talk over some things afterwards to make sure we knew, there were certain things that needed a little bit of clearing up. Once you get there, like, the various people, and we're talking like completely different age groups and such. I have not shown this to someone who was younger than 18, don't worry. But yeah, all of them, once we talked about it, they were like, oh wow, that actually, it really, really works. There's really no weak spot in this, like there's no major character that's just like, oh fuck this one, and there's no story here that is just like, okay, can this be over soon, and I think that might be just about what I can say without spoiling anything about that. So yeah, the cinematography, we can have some wonderful long takes, and this time we get like very compelling tracking shots which I'm not saying Reservoir Dogs didn't have, but here, like, some of this stuff, like sets and locations, it's like, holy shit. And the it really shows a mastery of the various aspects of cinematography. It knows when to use, like, there's at least one wide shot in this that I really wasn't expecting the first time I watched it, and it works so well. And it also, it uses also medium and close-ups. And the editing, this is one of the best edited Tarantino movies. And not all heroes were capes, but Sally Menke deserved one. Just absolutely spectacular work here. There are things that ended up on the cutting room floor where it's like, that does sound really cool. I understand why that was originally in there, but as it is, like, there's genuinely not an ounce of fat on this. It is lean, despite being, like, if you don't count the end credits, it's 2 hours and I want to say 24 minutes, but it just flies by. And like, this was actually the first time I watched this was, I guess I was a teenager when I first watched it. Okay, so I didn't show it to him. We both watched it without knowing anything much about it, just that it was popular. But among our demographic, but yeah, when I was a teenager, I will admit now, I was not the most patient. You really had to grab my attention for me to sit through a movie that was honestly over 90 minutes. And yeah, I try to, when I do a video on one of those, then I really try to underline that that was very much a case of that, you know. And I think that does pretty much... Yeah, so there's one major thing about the editing that I really can't say without spoiling anything, so I'll discuss it in the thoughts section. The production value is great. It never feels like something has been, like, budgeted out. There's never a time where we're not shown something that, you know, yeah, that we're like, oh, it must have been because it cost money. And the set design, locations, costumes, and makeup are all really great, really tell us things about the characters. You know, you might see where someone lives, works, that sort of thing. And you get a real sense of, you know, I have never been to LA, but this is one of those movies where you really feel like it's a real place. You know, that's one of those things, you know, when Hollywood sets something in LA, it can sometimes get... Yeah, to be clear, I do appreciate sometimes it is very much on purpose. They are trying to make it seem larger than life, like a city where dreams come true kind of thing. And those are not necessarily bad movies, but I do really appreciate every so often getting something where it's like, no, 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 this is like, this feels like you could actually go there. And obviously some of it you hypothetically could. And the music, this has one of his best soundtracks. And there's this, yeah, like, in addition to it being just amazing fucking music, like this is worth, you know, I've encountered people who spent money on the soundtrack and at no point was it like, why? In addition to the original music just being amazing, it's also used so well. Like, sometimes it just fits so you don't even notice it the first time. You might not notice it the first time you watch it. Other pieces of music really draw attention to themselves in a way that works really well. And the sound design is also just incredible. There are things in here that you're not going to be able to stop thinking about certain sounds in this. And I've already mentioned that it's about, you know, it's set in the world of crime. You know, the violence really sounds brutal. And the characters, so I've already mentioned that there's a tremendous amount of variety here. And it really feels like Tarantino understands all these different, like, there are different cultures on display here, and you won't necessarily spend like forever with, you know, at least not all of them, but you get a sense of them. You feel like you've, you know, encountered someone from... it's like, you know, tourism, but in the good way. And yeah, they are all just so fucking memorable. This is also one of those movies where I already mentioned the costuming is fantastic. There are various characters here that are... I suppose I don't know if they still are, but for a while they were very popular for like Halloween costumes and such. And yeah, it helps a lot that, you know, so again, this is not really a diss, but, you know, Reservoir Dogs, a lot of like black suits and sunglasses and such. And it's not that there's none of that here, but there is more, yeah, more different ones, and that makes it more impactful when you do see a black suit. And I think that brings us to the acting. So I want to make clear when I say the following that I am not at all taking away from Samuel Jackson's truly amazing talent when I say that this movie pretty much created the image that it's been a little while since I saw him in something brand new, but for a while at least, for years and years, he was someone, I mean, yeah, once he entered the MCU, it was still, that was still a thing. So yeah, fairly recently he was still, not every single thing he's played since this has been his character of Jules here. But when it isn't, it tends to be that it's subverting that rather than just that it's a completely different, there was a while where I didn't remember, and I'm not sure I'm the only one. And I believe this was this same year or maybe the year after or something like that. This was around the same time. This came either the same year or slightly after or something as fucking Jurassic Park. Samuel Jackson is in Jurassic Park, and he's not just in it for like a few seconds either. And his character's not bad there. It's not like super unmemorable or something, but this was the one that really had people like remembering, him distinctly. And yeah, it's fantastic that he's been able to play not always variations, again, sometimes it's subversions of this character for so long, because he really does, like, I don't think I've ever been unhappy with a Sam Jackson performance in anything. And he's also one of, he's a quite frequent, collaborator with Tarantino, after this. And technically he did also appear in True Romance, which was not directed by him. But yeah, the, and Tarantino kept thinking of new things to do with him. He might actually, of the various ones I've seen, Tarantino himself might be one of the best in my experience. Again, I haven't watched everything, that at also having something completely different for Jackson to do. But yes, to be clear, obviously, I fucking love his performance in Unbreakable. It is so gripping, And yeah, like, there are various actors here that you might know from at least one other thing, and some of them, their career was not in the best spot, and this helped, give it a shot of adrenaline. Some of them were, yeah, this was when they made it big. Some of them, it wasn't necessarily that, but while not all of them necessarily get as much screen time as one might think or hope, they are, like, not a single major cast member here is just wasted. Like, there's some that you remember years after watching the movie, even though they don't have that much screen time, because they have presence and character. And yeah, like, I'm not going to mention every single one, but I'll note that Uma Thurman, some of my favorite work of hers is with Tarantino, and yeah, Ving Rhames, just the intensity that he brings to stuff like this. And you've got people like John Travolta, whose coolness, I mean, he is really, if he had not been in this movie, if Tarantino didn't work with Travolta, we'd be like, what happened there? Like, what did one of them piss the other off or something? He is like pitch perfect for Tarantino's style. This is one of my favorite performances of Bruce Willis' career. Up there with, obviously, his John McClane is fantastic as well. And I think, yeah, I feel like at this point I'm just listing, honestly, just any one of them. They're so fucking good. I think this was the first time where I really, like, this was a movie that had me seek out more work by Amanda Plummer. It might also have been the first thing I saw her in, but I wouldn't necessarily have thought of doing so if not. Yeah, I think that is what I will say for that. Yeah, the pacing is incredible. Like, there are scenes that go by fast, but yet they make an impression. They get something important across rather than rushing through. And you have scenes that take their time, where you really feel it. You are in it. And that is one of those things, like, so obviously I'm trying to not like worship the ground Tarantino walks on. He's said and done fucked up things that I'm not sure I'm going to go too much into here. Other leftist YouTubers can, do so. If you haven't already, let's see, Broy Deschanel has done, I believe it was specifically on this movie. Right now I forget if it was a YouTube or a Nebula video, but yeah, that was really excellent. Watch that when it first came out. Anyway, but I do really appreciate about Tarantino that he is one of those directors who is willing to let something play out instead of saying, people don't have the patience for this. Like, when he started making these movies, he was like in his 20s or something, I think, and he was making movies for other 20-something guys. But he also appreciated that, that's something I sometimes, I'll crack open one of a copy of I own of a 70s movie, because, like, my God, they understood back then. Listen, sometimes you let things sit a little. You don't rush through it. And, like, I'm a child of the 90s, so I have a fondness for a lot of 90s movies, but I do also really sometimes, and Tarantino is not the only director who was still doing it in the 90s and, is doing it today, arguably to a fault. I maintain that, something like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood just goes on for too long, on account of the editor perishing. For his usual editor perishing, I forget exactly when, but the most recent movies he's made, they lack that, the insistence on cutting anything that is getting excessive. masturbatory. But I think that does pretty much, yeah. There is tremendous tension here, and some scenes that are also very intense. And yeah, the atmosphere is very strong. Like, you really get a sense of, yeah, this is a world of crime. This is not, safe. This is not comfortable. Though some of the characters are comfortable in it. And yeah, I am going to discuss some of the stuff that gets at the R rating in the thought section for the review without spoilers. What I will say is it definitely goes harder than some might have thought that it would, and it's definitely, like, if you think it's one of those things where if you find yourself asking the question, is this too much for me? Is this going to, upset me with how R-rated it is? Then the answer is probably yes. It was actually one of the movies that I, used to train myself to better, tolerate it. This and 1982's The Thing were two of the really big movies that helped me get to, to today, like, I can get emotionally into something that's very, graphic, for example. But I don't even remember. It's been a lot of years since I watched something where I, like, had to look away or cover my eyes or something. That's very, very long time ago, And if you find yourself struggling, cute pets on Reddit are a good way to help bring yourself back down so you can recover faster. Yeah. This is a... See, it's gonna sound like I'm fucking glazing the guy, but yeah. 10 deeply engaging crime stories out of 10. And yeah, this is one of those movies where I feel like criticism of it, which is obviously, I'm not sure if I particularly have yet, but I will in the thought section. There's nothing wrong with criticizing this movie, absolutely. But it accomplishes what it sets out to do, and it aims high. Essentially, the things you can criticize tend to be, I think that does segue into the thoughts section. So from here on out, once again, I will spoil absolutely everything about this movie from here on out. The way that he depicts certain things does have, yeah. I guess I'll just briefly note, I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the foot fetish shit. I don't think there's anything wrong with having a fetish. I think it is... It is one of those things where, Tarantino, as a cishet white man who grew up in America, a lot of pop culture has taught him that he is the center of the fucking universe, and if he wants something, he should just go and get it, and, not really think too much about, like, yeah, it bugs me. It does. I'm just not going to spend forever talking about it. I've seen others discuss it, and yeah, I am very much sex positive. feminist, I believe that consent is the one thing that really, you know, yeah, under those circumstances, then yeah, do what you and your partner or partners feel like. But I wish that he did not put it so much in his movies. And this isn't even the one that goes the hardest and is the worst about it. Now, I think so I've pretty much said everything that I feel I really have to say about, not as in am forced to, but feel qualified to say is maybe a better way to put it, about the way that Tarantino's characters talk about minorities. And yeah, I mean, I feel like the casual racism and misogyny, I hope that it is there to characterize the people and the environment more than be something that he wants everyone to, and I do think it is, like, there's a spectrum here. Some of these characters definitely hate minorities more than others, and some of the ones that are the most, like, you know, Jimmy, that character, who I quite appreciate, that, both that Tarantino plays a character that we don't necessarily really like because he's being an asshole to characters we do like. I'm not saying we necessarily, obviously you shouldn't imitate Jules and Vincent, but they have a charisma to them, whereas Jimmy is a void thereof, which I appreciate. Some would say so is Tarantino in real life. I don't think I'm going to comment on that one. But yeah, he very casually uses the N-word. And so right now I forget, was it both Maynard and Zed, or was it just one of them? At least one of them does. And yeah, they are rapist assholes. So I do think that is, yeah, the, the fact that some of them are the ones who, yeah. Let's see, I think, honestly, I do want to give some credit to the way minorities are depicted here. And I'm obviously not, please don't listen to me over members of those minorities. I base what I say here on what I've heard from leftist members of those communities. Part of it is that I know there are a number of cishet white men who refuse to listen to minorities, and so I'm hoping to help them realize some of these things. But yeah, the times in this movie where women or black men get angry, it tends to be because a white guy just fucked them over in some way. Fabienne gets angry with Butch when he mocks her. Jules gets angry, among other characters, he gets very angry at Vincent. And also Brett, because Brett is slowing things down. They're there to do a job, and yeah. And let's see, yeah, I mean, the even when they're right, and yeah, let's see, I'm afraid I forget, was it Jody maybe, the partner of the Eric Stoltz character, the one who talks about all her piercings. She's like, why the fuck are people calling us at, what was it, like 2:30 a.m.? Like, Jesus Christ. You can understand why. And as much as some of these minority characters in the movie might be seen to shout, scream, cry, that sort of thing, like, yeah, they don't become like completely irrational and dangerous, as you sometimes see in American and other Western media when it depicts minorities. Like, there are times when Fabienne needs Butch to calm her down, but like, of course that's sometimes the case. She's a regular person caught up in this like fucked up situation, So yeah, and yeah, like, if you pay close attention to Jules, he's never just like shouting nonsense. That's one that the racists really fucking love. They love the idea that, white men are so superior, and very calmly, you know murder innocent people under certain circumstances. Obviously not universally, but it's always, ever since I was a child, the fact that you have all these white Republicans claiming that they are inherently superior to other ethnicities. When you look at, but okay, I'm sorry, who was fucking lynching people again? Who was it who, had slaves, beat them, raped them, and then said that they didn't have, family values? They just couldn't keep their family together. Your ancestors were the fuckers who split up so many of these families. And there's so many aspects of white supremacy that make it so much more difficult for non-whites to thrive. But yeah, when Jules raises his voice, what he's saying does make sense. And he's not always de-escalating the situation, but then he is, let's see, what's the word? I guess gunman? He's sent around to deal with people who try to fuck over the boss. It comes with the job. It's not that he's just like, this completely, yeah. And, and ultimately, like, it's not like he's more violent than Vincent. He's the one who does more of the talking with Brett, but, they both shoot Brett and the guy in the bathroom. And I think that might more or less... So Mia is obviously somewhat spoiled, but that's not really a woman thing. That's just like, well, she's the partner of this crime lord, and she doesn't have that much freedom. So yeah, she does a lot of drugs and, goes to, expensive restaurants and stuff like that. It's, and I think that might more or less cover, yeah, like, overall, the minority characters in this movie are not really shown to be inherently lesser. And, in real life, minorities are not inherently lesser compared to the majority. And there is a reasonable amount of emotional intelligence on display. It acknowledges that, hopefully it's not like doing gender essentialism, because that's fucking bullshit. But, there are differences that are fairly common on account of socialization. and it understands those without trying to make it seem like one of these is inherently better. I suppose that is more or less the sort of stuff I should get out of the way before I start talking scene by scene. Let's see. So, yeah, I think that is... Yes. So, I can't promise this will be... that I'll discuss the scenes in the order they appear in the movie, but I'll, at least at first, try to do so. But yeah, so right from the intro, Tarantino has arrived. That was also very much the case with the intro of... Right, and when I say intro here, I mean the very first scene. Reservoir Dogs also had a very strong opening there, but yeah, the way that this scene... So it starts with them just talking, like it's just two people talking in a diner, big deal. And then, like, you realize, oh, they rob places and people. And they start talking about it in such a casual fucking way, like they're ordering a pizza, like, I don't want to go to that place. There's going to be someone who's got a big fucking gun and they're going to murder us. The way that you or I might say, I don't know, anchovies? But yeah, that's also a place where, yeah, I mean, hopefully we're not supposed to... I think I'll call him Ringo as well. Hopefully we're not supposed to think that Ringo is right in how he talks about, yeah, Jewish people and East Asian immigrants and such. Anyway, but yeah, the it's an actual, like, they're a couple and they're talking like they're there's a reason we say bicker like an old married couple, and that is a real thing, and it's not just like, oh, women. No, men do it as well. I don't... Okay, to be clear, straight men, I do not know about... I'm not personally... I don't know anyone in person who is in a non-straight relationship. I'm not like avoiding them or something. But the yeah, they're talking about, like, he's laying out these things he doesn't like, and she's like, you sound like a duck. Quack, quack, quack. Like, genuinely, they sound like... Because, it's one of those things, like, this is clearly, like, yeah, she's tired of how he's complaining a lot, and yeah, that just wasn't something that we saw that much. Like, there was a long time where criminals were, like, either just pathetic, if, that was kind of a Hays Code thing. They were like, look at these, you don't want to be these people, do you? And obviously you shouldn't want to be, but anyway. Or they were, like, just Saturday morning cartoon villain evil. And Tarantino's, they're kind of just human beings, they're not necessarily good people, but they're not caricatures. And yeah, suddenly, one of them, I think it's Ringo who puts a gun on the table. Presumably he wants to sing more. And then I do appreciate that he specifically chose that. So I personally have no issue with Ringo Starr. I believe that is his full name, but a lot of people think of him as the least of the Beatles, with Paul and John being some of the obvious favorites, But yeah, it's... Yeah, so, he puts the gun on the table. And it is also, I do appreciate, like, technically, so obviously I'm not condoning what they're doing, but they make sense, and again, the way that they just casually talk about it, like, like the way they talk about what place or type of place they're gonna rob next and when is like the kind of conversation I would have, if I'm going like grocery shopping with someone. Like, I don't know. I feel like if we leave now, and then I mean, okay, so Aldi has that pizza that's really great, but Lidl often has deals that you just don't see anywhere else. So let's hit both places, and we should probably leave early so we're not going to get like completely exhausted before we're able to, I think that's a good plan, It's just, yeah. And yeah, it's one of those things, like if you're not on board with the movie, when Amanda Plummer shouts, "If any of you fucking pricks move, I'll execute every motherfucking last one of ya." And then we get a guitar riff as this like surfer music plays. Yeah, this just might not be your kind of movie, And I also fucking love how subversive it is that, part way through, so it plays some of that, or possibly the entire track, and then it sounds like, let's see, I guess it's like a record scratch. Shit, it's been forever since my dad used to have a proper record player. When I was a kid and teenager, he played me, rock music from his youth. But I think it's a record scratch that we hear, and then like, okay, they put on another record, and then that music plays, like, just, yeah, the way it calls attention to itself like that is, yeah. And the second thing is the briefcase, and yeah, just these conversations, so again, I said most of, the stylistic wise, I described this in my video on Reservoir Dogs. But yeah, this is, I do feel that he really, like, it's fantastic in Reservoir Dogs. It is even better here, the way that people just talk in ways that they don't, it's not necessarily that anybody talks like this in the real world, but it's how you kind of wish you talked. If you're retelling a story, you might pretend like this is how you talked in that situation. And the way that they discuss pop culture and, fast food and such, this was like not quite as smooth in real life, but yeah, these were conversations we'd have, and the, yeah, seeing these characters talk like that really humanizes them, which makes it all the more powerful when, like when we first meet Jules and Vincent, like we almost immediately like them. They seem like just, you wouldn't necessarily be happy if they came to your door, all things considered, but like if you saw them talking in a bar in public, you'd probably like, oh, those are some badass motherfuckers, And yeah, just the way that they talk about, the differences between Europe and, how, yeah, the different names and such, and the laws in Amsterdam regarding drugs and such, just like, yeah, it's and it also conveys a lot about who they are. As soon as they start talking about drugs, it's like, oh, they and so I don't think I'm going to talk too much about drugs in this, like, as as far as my personal opinion goes. I mean, like, I don't, with drugs, as with so many other things, like, be careful, don't let it get out of control. And, there are certain drugs that you should definitely be extremely careful with, maybe even avoid altogether. I'm not the right person to tell you about those. I've never done drugs, almost definitely never will. I'm not saying that I'm better than people who have. I feel, a lot of sympathy towards the, like, we all have problems, and, you know, if you don't have a good enough support network, it can be very difficult not to end up, in some kind of substance abuse. And yeah, I'm a big believer in trying to be there for other people and trying to make sure you have people who can be there for you. But the when you hear these two characters talk about drugs in Amsterdam, it becomes clear, like, they like the idea of being able to, you know, like, it doesn't cross their mind that maybe, you know, I don't know, maybe it's not so bad that there's, some rules about drugs and such, some laws regarding it. And to be clear, I'm not saying that America does a particularly good job with that. The war on drugs was always about profit, not about protecting people. And, you know, um, you don't have to take my word for it. It's been well documented. And one of, I want to say, Nixon's aides, who helped develop the war on drugs, said, yeah, it was a way for us to hit back on political rivals. We could target black people and hippies like that. But yeah, at the same time, the scene is also accomplishing that, yeah, clearly they know drugs well. And later we see, miscommunication when Mia ends up, because she thinks it's coke, and in reality it's heroin, and a very intense kind of it as well. Now, I think that might bring us to, yeah, and the, such a cool sequence when they're walking, and the, long tracking shot as they're walking up to the apartment. And, we get a trunk shot, this time sans a person in the trunk looking up at them. And, they talk about we should have fucking shotguns. And it's like, oh shit, what is about to happen? Because, like, these are two such cool guys, and they seem so in control. And for them to be saying, I don't know about this, that really puts us on edge. And we remain there until they shoot Brett, And I think that does... Yeah, I don't think I'm going to touch too much on the whole thing with, foot massage and all that kind of thing. I think it does illustrate well this thing of, different people, even people who are close, like, it's very clear, like, the two, sometimes they get on each other's nerves, but they do care about each other, and they still have completely different views on how this is, yeah. And I think that brings us to, yeah, so yeah, they go in there, and immediately, even though the gun isn't drawn right away, and they're not, like, saying, they're neither verbally nor physically threatening, but they control the room completely, and you have these power moves such as, like, obviously him asking for the burger, like, he could have essentially taken it. What the fuck is Brett gonna do? But he asks, forcing Brett to say, yes, you may eat some of my food right in front of my fucking face. Go ahead. And then asks for the drink. And that is one thing I will say. And maybe I can't rule out that maybe in America Sprite is very different than it is here in Denmark. But I'm telling you right now, I used to drink Sprite. Friends of mine used to drink Sprite. Sprite was a drink I drank. And describing it as a tasty beverage is inconsistent with my personal experience. I bought it because I wanted to reward the ad agencies. That was back when I was more okay with capitalism than I am now. I wanted to reward them because their ads were fucking funny. They weren't just trying, I've never really been into like the Coca-Cola ads, for example, but Sprite would be like, listen, just you're thirsty, we're selling you something to drink, just, and it did also get especially funny, albeit unintentionally so, when they went from obey your thirst to just obey and went like full fucking they live. But yeah, and and you also, during that entire exchange, you have the thing about, well, my, was it girlfriend, my partner is vegetarian, and that means I have to be vegetarian. And I kind of appreciate, like, I think, I remember people talking about this scene and being like, oh, look at that, but like not really thinking about, I mean, he isn't really saying that that's wrong. He's just kind of describing that that's part of the relationship he has with his partner. He's like, if he said, that he resents her for that, I mean, is someone in that room gonna fucking tattle on him? Like, he would be able to get away with it, but he just explains, I don't eat as much meat anymore because my partner wants me to be vegetarian. And sometimes I miss it. That's, yeah. And it's not really treated as something that's inherent. It is also, he's one of the most badass characters in the movie. And he openly admits, yeah, most of the time I'm vegetarian. Like, this is the kind of thing, you could easily have, like, misogynistic men saying, oh, you shouldn't let a woman control you, or, vegetarianism, that's so weak. Did you see that there was a tweet where someone said that the reason that white leftist women are now, like, criticizing ICE, including to the face of ICE agents, is because left-wing American men are so weak and these women are just so in need of having like a man, a big masculine man. So I said that I wasn't going to talk too much about drugs, but I think you might have a copium problem. That's, you need to touch grass. That's, you're completely, that is not even remotely the reality of the situation. Boy, they are desperate to try to convince us that no, ice aren't really that bad. Jeez, I mean, I know they're called ice, but they really do fucking melt at absolutely nothing. Anyway, yeah, I like the detail that, there's the thing about, so where's the case? Oh, it's in the cupboard, and no, the one by your knees. Just a little detail like that, and that he also has to, like, grab a couple of, like, pots and pans, it sounds like, to get to the actual case. And he unlocks it with 666, and looks in, and there's like golden light on his face, and we never do see, and I do really appreciate that, like, there were years after this movie came out where people were like, I bet it's this, I bet it's that, and like, one of the there's a popular theory that it is Marcellus Wallace's soul, and that's why he has like a band-aid on the back of his head, when that was not, apparently not what Tarantino intended, but if I recall correctly, he doesn't mind that interpretation. But yeah, so we are, encouraged to make up our own minds about what's in there, but yeah, it's golden, and like Vincent is like stunned at first and then responds, yeah, we're happy. So I mean, it's copies of Thief Gold, obviously. If you've only ever played Thief Dark Project and you have access to Thief Gold, trust me, some of those extra levels, fucking amazing. But yeah, and the way that Jules controls the conversation, Brett will make a bullshit, and say, we're so sorry about how, and yes, Jules just goes and shoots the guy on the sofa, and he also made sure, he's like, stay on the sofa, and, he put the guy's feet on the sofa, because, like, the guy's not going to be able to go for a gun and quickly get into cover. If, it's really controlling the entire environment there. And I swear I'm not going to quote it, but obviously, at least not the entire thing, but obviously the entire thing with, as he's getting answers from Brett, and Brett keeps saying what, and he ends up fucking shooting him, is amazing. It's some of Tarantino's best. And it, in addition to it being really cool, it is obviously also where we get, there's the thing about, you tried to fuck Marcellus Wallace, and Marcellus Wallace doesn't like to get fucked by anyone but Mrs. Wallace. And later in the movie, he is indeed, yeah, he's being raped. And when you first watch the movie, you don't think that that's going to be like set up, that there's going to be payoff to it. And let's see. Yeah, that brings us to... Yeah, then we get another cut that is clearly moving to, later, yeah, hours later. And at this point in the movie, we still think, on an initial viewing, that it's not going to have a nonlinear timeline. This was something, the nonlinear timeline is set up very early in Reservoir Dogs. It really wears it on its sleeve. But this movie, like, it's important to understanding it on the whole, in my opinion, but you don't fully realize it for sure, that it's not just jumping ahead by several hours, but, the fact that the first scene technically takes place, after the second scene and after the whole Bonnie situation even, it's not the last thing that happens in the movie. And the movie also doesn't end on the last thing that happens. Technically, the last thing that happens chronologically is Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead, and they drive off, on his bike, his chopper. Sorry, Butch. And the, let's see. What's the other thing that I wanted to say with that? Yeah, the way that these stories affect each other, where at first it's, you have no idea what the relationship is between, Honey Bunny and Pumpkin, and then other characters. Yeah, so the next thing is when I think the next is let's see, is it the date or is it I think it might be the date. Let's go with that. Yeah, so we have yeah. I think I'm gonna go directly to the no, wait, yeah, I think actually before that it's yeah, we meet Butch. And it is very cool, like, once we meet Butch, we've met most of the major characters, and it's very early in the movie, and you don't realize yet that, there's still, there are important characters left, but the ones that have a lot of screen time, the ones that have an entire story where they're the protagonist, once we meet Butch, we've met I suppose an argument could be made that it's once we meet Fabienne that we've truly, but yeah, and I'm afraid I forget what YouTuber, it's been years, but I remember someone made a video talking about how this movie, one of the keys to understanding it is respect. And it's very clear that, really Marcellus doesn't respect Butch the way he talks to him. He thinks he has power over him, and because of that, and it's very clear that Butch can't stand that kind of thing. He tries to be respectful to others, and that's also how he and yeah, others are not always respectful to him. When Butch goes up to the bar, and we appreciate, okay, so Vincent is already annoyed, and we'll understand better why later, because yeah, we notice that they're wearing these, yeah, this completely other clothing than they were earlier, but we don't necessarily think that we're going to find out why. It seems like it's just like a detail, not necessarily a big deal, but yeah, there's really no reason for Vincent to be an asshole to Butch. It's just that he is kind of an asshole. He can't really control his temper all that well, and he keeps acting like other people are not being polite enough to him, which, yeah, Winston does a fantastic job. Just like, yeah, pretty fucking please. With shit on top, clean the fucking car. But yeah, like Butch just goes up. He doesn't even comment on the clothing. He just goes up, buys cigarettes, and Vincent just stands there and just stares at him for like several seconds straight. And even then, Butch isn't like, "What the fuck are you doing?" He's just like, "What are you looking at?" Just like, "Hey, can you stop doing that? Like, that's pretty fucking rude. Just stop being a jackass." And yeah, Vincent insults him with two different, yeah, based on his, him being a boxer. Yeah, he doesn't respect him, and it's not why he ends up dead, but the fact that he ends up shot by this guy that he, because like, yeah, once he was told, oh yeah, that boxer that you met the other day, yeah, he's, or earlier, whatever, the boxer you met at the bar, yeah, he fucked me over. We gotta go to his place, just in case he shows up again. At that point, Vincent was like, really? Babysitting? Okay, fine. And he didn't bring the gun into the bathroom, and he doesn't think to, I appreciate that Butch was quiet getting into his apartment, but leaving the gun there was like completely ridiculous yeah. And that brings us to, yeah, and the bartender also comments on, really, you're going to go out with the boss's wife? And let's see, then we have the, let's see, I guess that brings us to the, yeah, so yeah, he goes to the date, and immediately, like, it's impossible to not find her at least like charming. She leaves a note that says, I'm getting ready, just, the door's unlocked, just come on in. And he comes in, and the whole thing with the what's it called again, the, yeah, where he has to hold down the button to be able to talk to her. And we see her very red lips before we see her face. We also see her feet before we see her face. And yeah, this thing of like, oh, go ahead and make a drink, and it's like, it's not super uncommon if in certain environments, if you, once you're in the door at someone's place, if you're leaving for somewhere, go ahead and get a drink or something. But this is the first time he's been, at the very least, in her presence. I'm not sure he's ever been to Marcellus's place, without other people there at all, other than Mia there, and yeah. Let's see, and I guess that brings us to them. Yeah, so yeah, they arrive at Jackrabbit Slim's, one of the best sets in any Tarantino movie. I didn't experience the 60s, but I do have a fondness for them. My father introduced me to a lot of the 60s culture when I was a child, and yeah, like, other than the fucking price of this stuff, yeah, this looks like such a fucking cool place. And yeah, the let's see. Yeah, great to see Steve Buscemi again, and in a Tarantino thing. And yeah, the tracking shot, as we see, we really get a sense of this place. Yeah, really amazing. And I like the distinction that, there's not two Marilyn Monroes. One of them is Jane Mansfield, I think it was. And he notes that, I'm afraid I forget the name of the third one. I don't think I've watched any of her movies. I have watched, let's see, I guess with Marilyn Monroe, I think the only one I watched was Some Like It Hot, which I'm not the right person to say if that movie is technically problematic, but, it's... I don't think I could say anything about it without risking... Obviously, if it is transphobic, then that's really fucked up. That's all I will say about that. Other than that, I liked her performance in it. I totally understand why a lot of people were like, okay, some people are going to say, oh, because, conventionally attractive. Part of it, sure, but she genuinely did, like, get and keep your attention. And I think that does... Yeah, the entire thing of them ordering food was great. And yeah, once the shake is on the table, he tries a little, and there's that thing about, like, she says he doesn't have to use a different straw. The what was it, like, I don't have cooties. Well, maybe I do. Yours I can handle. Those are things that, like, this is starting to look like a date. This is looking less like just, yeah, you just, I don't know, she doesn't want to eat alone, I guess. What's the big deal? No. This is starting to feel like an actual date. And we have the, yeah, the way that, so there's a brief awkward silence, and she points out that it's great when you know someone so well that you don't have to worry about awkward silences, when you don't have to fill the air with just meaningless, empty bullshit small talk, And he says, I don't think we're there yet, but it's okay because we just met. So she's very much kind of like, she's essentially teasing him. She knows that, there's a lot of men who would, be extremely attracted to her, but she's off limits to them, and so she's playing, yeah. And it's one of those things, when you're depicting something like that, the important thing is to not make it seem like, oh, she's evil for this. It's just, like, if you genuinely can't handle being around someone who teases you a little like that, see if you can, yeah, avoid spending more time with them than absolutely have to. And obviously there are lines that shouldn't be crossed, but she doesn't, like, sexually harass him or something, And yeah, she is basically just bored. She's playing. She's not trying to ruin his life or something. And that's an important distinction that I feel the movie does a good job making. I've yet to encounter someone who watched this movie and felt like, oh, wow, Mia's just a fucking monster, She's like one of those femme fatales out of a neo-noir that's just ruining the guy's life because she's just so fucked up, But yeah, she's teasing him and he's pushing back on it, respectfully, carefully, and it is very fun because we already know he's, you know, he can be a little bit of an asshole, and I guess by then we haven't really seen yet that he's like obsessed with whether or not other people are sufficiently polite to him. That's the Bonnie situation, but yeah, it is funny that he's stuck in this, he's having to tiptoe around, walk on eggshells because he's terrified that she's gonna, tell Marcellus. And obviously, it does end up going wrong, but not in the way that he thought it might and others thought it might. And yeah, let's see, I think it was the bartender who said, "Have you ever met Mia?" I'm not saying anything, because he knows, like, yeah, she's gonna tease him some. And yeah, the entire conversation about the pilot is also a lot of fun, and it is genuinely kind of cool. Like, apparently for a while they were going to do something else with Fox Force 5 as well, but I'm not the first person to say it, obviously, but yeah, Fox Force 5, not entirely unlike Kill Bill, but yeah, very, very cool that and it does sound like the kind of thing that they would make and that might not do quite well enough. It sounds a little too tropey for a lot of people to, yeah. And I especially love, when he goes like, "What?" She goes, "Okay. Fox, because we're a bunch of foxes. Force, because we're a force to be reckoned with. And 5, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us." Just like, do I have to explain everything, or are you going to be able to keep up? And yeah, the thing about, "I promise I won't laugh. That's what I'm afraid of." And yeah, she goes to powder her nose, which turns out she means fairly literally, not in the original sense of that word, but she's talking about cocaine. And let's see, yeah, then we get let's see, yeah, she comes back and like, "Okay, did you think of something to say?" And he asks about, Antoine. And she does not know why yeah. And she points out, essentially that men gossip like women do. And that is something that is absolutely true. And I'm so glad, like, this is one of those things, if it wasn't Tarantino saying it, like, who's going to say that Tarantino is like, not at all macho, not as macho as his characters, but he I'm trying not to talk too much about him as a person because others have done a really good job talking about, I've already mentioned he has definitely got his share of character flaws. I'm not trying to defend anything he's said or done. Trying to focus on the work. But yeah, the fact that he's the one saying, in a movie, because it's very true. Like, if that's another thing that it really bugs me when misogynistic men say, "Oh, women, they just gossip." Have you never been in a locker room? Because I have. I wish I hadn't. There's a lot of things that I did not need to hear, but trust me, it is genuinely, it gets ridiculous. I'm not saying that women never gossip, but something I have noticed when I see, women talking about how they and the people they know gossip with their friends, let's see, I think it was maybe Anna Akana who made the point that, at least some of the time, it's to try to help the person they're talking about. And sometimes, like, as nice as it would be if it were never the case, sometimes in order to help someone, you do have to figure out how to help them. And sometimes that happens by talking behind their back. And in my personal experience, when men gossip, it's more about hurting the person they're gossiping about, spreading lies and just saying just absurd shit when the person isn't there to defend themselves. Just, yeah. And I think the let's see. I guess that brings us to yeah, and then there's the dancing competition, right? And there's also they do the, I would say, 7-year itch thing with Marilyn Monroe and the skirt, over the vent. And yeah, she doesn't even ask. She just says, I want to dance. I want to win that trophy. So dance, and dance well. And he's clearly not like at all comfortable with this situation, and is genuinely just so fun to see. Like, he is one of the characters that wears this black suit whenever he can, as a lot of characters in Reservoir Dogs. And yeah, seeing him, standing, dancing is, yeah. And I'm not the first person to point out, but yeah, the trophy that is held up, and as they talk about, okay, so here's what you could win, and the one they bring home later, they do not appear to be the same trophy. And whether or not this means that they went to some other dance competition and won there, or maybe just like fucking stole the trophy from some other dance competition, is not clear, but it is really, really fucking funny. And right, so I don't have a huge amount to say about the I guess I'll briefly note, yeah. So the Eric Stoltz character, he is also racist. And again, I mean, he's not a good person, so it is just, yeah. And let's see. Yeah, the frank discussion of piercings, I mean, I appreciate there is at least a little bit of, it's, we don't spend that much time with a character that has piercings, and essentially, like, one of the only characters who does have piercings, and the only one who, like, makes a big deal out of piercings, has, what did she say, 17, and that's, so it is obviously, at least in part, saying, wow, some people really need to cool it on piercings. But at the same time, she's not, like, evil or something. And I think the things that she says, I've heard others say that they think a piercing should, or let's see, she said that it should be done with needle, not gun, because that's part of the point. And she points out that there's like sexual stimulation with some of these piercings, which, like, okay, fair enough, like, there's not really anything wrong with it. Like, hypothetically, you could so easily have had, like, I'm gonna do a real quick rewrite. If we were trying to make this just like super unappealing, you could have it be that she was talking about how, like, there's no greater joy in life than forcing a piercing on someone who hates it, or something like that. Then it would be like, okay, she's fucked up, but no, she just talks about, like, oh yeah, she likes the way it feels, it's good for sexual stimulation. Okay, not a big deal. And I think, part of it is also the fact that, Vincent, like, clearly is not big on piercings. And yeah, the way he's standing there and asking her, yeah, it's a fun contrast. It's very clear that he only goes there for drugs, buying drugs from her husband. That's the only, yeah. And we get a very detailed description of, what's so amazing about the what he ends up buying. And then we have a sequence that I appreciate some people might say, oh, it's like romanticizing. I think it serves a setup for the later payoff that he fucked up by leaving those drugs in his pocket, and Mia ODs and almost fucking dies, So it's important that we at least appreciate how powerful it is, and essentially she makes, let's see. So I am not an expert on drugs, but I do understand that it is a very different thing whether you are injecting it or uh, doing a line of it. She does a line of it, which sends it directly up into the brain basically immediately, and fucks with her nasal passage and shit. Whereas he melts it and injects some into his bloodstream, which means that it's, and yeah, that's how it's supposed to be done. And they also make the point about, the baggie. Is a baggie okay? Because normally you wouldn't, I guess, buy heroin in a baggie. You would buy cocaine in a baggie, and that's why she thinks. And it's also, she does 3 lines in a matter of hours. She does it right before they leave for the restaurant. She does it during the restaurant. And she does it after they get back from the restaurant. Yeah, very clearly bored and just looking for some kind of stimulation. She gets more than she bargained for there. But I think that does, and again, when I first watched this, I was a teenager, and at no point in watching it did I, even before we see the OD, I wasn't thinking, oh wow, I should definitely go out and get this. Now, I think, that is one thing. I do think it is important for movies to not make it seem like drugs are a harmless source of fun. I'm a big believer in showing the results, the potential consequences, and this movie does it. So does Trainspotting, at least the first one. Haven't watched the second one. I might at some point. And right, Pusher one. Haven't watched the sequels, or wasn't there a remake? Anyway, I think, let's see. I think that does get us to, yeah. So yeah, they're back from the restaurant, and now they are casually dancing with each other, and like very clearly, he is struggling to keep his distance. Even though he knows he has to, and he has to like give himself a pep talk in the bathroom. But yeah, she puts on music, and I think it might be like a record player and everything, just like fantastic. And I do, as someone who's experienced both, I will definitely say I think there's a charm that I have not seen replicated to an actual record player. I'm not saying you have to go out and buy one, but I definitely get why Tarantino put that in here instead of, something more, recent or current. I think, right, and yeah, so he says, I gotta go take a piss. And she says, that's more information than I needed, but okay. And later we see him tell Jules, I gotta go take a shit. So it is clear, like, he just doesn't spend that much time around women, and he doesn't really know how to, talk in a way that isn't, yeah. And let's see, I think that brings us to the, yeah. And so we see her, do the line, and he, gets in the car, drives towards the Eric Stoltz character. I think I said this in, maybe it was my video on, well, let's see. It was probably my video on the rules of attraction. I am not going out of my way to accomplish this, but it seems like nearly every time, possibly every time that I watch Eric Stoltz in something, it's an unusual role for him because like there's this Rules of Attraction and the butterfly effect and like yeah, it's to me these are the kinds of roles that he plays, even though I understand in actuality he has played, roles that are much milder than this. But yeah, and Vincent sure does get himself and others in trouble relating to cars and violence and, going to someone's place that doesn't really want to have to deal with his shit. And let's see, I especially like so for a while he just doesn't answer, and Vincent isn't even thinking, well, I guess it is a bad hour to go. He's just like, fucking asshole, answer the phone, and yeah, Stoltz, the character, visibly lets it ring for a while, and eventually, okay, fine, and she points out, I thought you told them not to fucking call at this hour. And that is also something I hear, some drug dealers have to deal with, people calling at all hours because some people who use drugs kind of lose track of time or wake up in the middle of the night and are like, okay, where the fuck is my stash? I need something now, and that sort of thing. And yeah, he drives there, and not only does, so he hangs up, but then we hear like he practically crashes the car. There's like a loud noise, and he goes out, and the only way that he ends up helping is because Vincent points out, I will literally fucking tell on you. I'll tell Marcellus that you let her die. What a fucking asshole. But yeah, because like, again, like, motherfucker, just leave the fucking drugs at home. Why were you bringing them on the date? What about a date with the boss's wife made you think that you would need a baggie full of fucking heroin? And obviously, like, the answer is, of course, he forgot it was in there, and that's, again, that's such one of these wonderful mundane problems that we all have. I've never forgotten drugs in there. Again, I don't do them, but again, I'm not trying to make myself sound, like some fucking saint or something, but I definitely have made mistakes in my life. But the yeah, like sometimes you might forget, like it's how you might accidentally forget to bring your keys when you go out, or something. It's just, yeah. And and the thing about, okay, so where's the black book? Well, why isn't it with the shot? Why are you yelling at me? Why is she making sense, you mean? And I appreciate it's not wonderful to be, told that when you've already fucked up. It's the kind of thing you want to be warned about before you fuck up. But yeah, it's anyway. And then and everyone yelling at, it's like, well, don't just stand there. You go find the black book. Well, why are you talking to me? I don't know. Why would talk to her? This whole thing just, yeah. Like all of them feel the need to yell at someone because it's a fucked up situation, and just, yeah. And yeah, he ends up going without the black book and just hoping for the best. And yeah, I am afraid I forget the source, but I did see someone delightfully describe this entire bit as, well, Quentin Tarantino fell in love with Uma Thurman, and the way he showed it was by doing a scene where he jabs a needle into her chest, into her heart. So yeah. And yeah, I like the thing about, okay, so you gotta jab it in there. What, like 3 times? No, not 3 times, but just hard, Because it's, again, like, I've done that. I've been trying to demonstrate how someone was supposed to do something, and then had to be like, no, I don't mean to do as many times. I'm just showing you multiple times so you get a sense of what it is you're supposed to do here. And yeah, the Jodie's face, and I think was it Trudy? Wait, I think that was her name. Yeah, she's also like looking, and Jodie being like, oh, that's so fucking cool. So maybe it's not so bad when people call late at night. But yeah, that brief moment where, and we see the liquid dripping from it, and then he like jabs it in, which was apparently the way that they did that safely was filming it in reverse, similar to how, at least one of the times where someone uses telekinesis of the, through the force to, pull a lightsaber close. Yeah, it was, they shot it in reverse, and it looks fantastic. I've never, of all the people I've shown it to, not one of them was like, did they just do that in reverse? Because like, that's obviously, you do run the risk when you shoot something in reverse that, because as soon as you pick up just one little, it's uncanny valley territory. And let's see, yeah, and I love the thing about say something, and and so he takes her home, and he doubts that she would be in as much trouble as he if Marcellus found out. And I don't know, I'm trying to not give too much credit, so I guess I'll note what it sounds like and what, yeah. So it sounds a little like Tarantino is pointing out that entirely too often cishet white men will simply not believe women when they explain that something is, really bad for them. And this is something that has serious consequences. There are women who have lost the child they were carrying because the doctor didn't take their concerns seriously enough. And, with Roe v. Wade overturned, I wonder how many women like that are then going to be charged with murder, even though it was the male doctor's fault. Right? Also saw, apparently, let's see. Okay, so I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Speculum. There's been a new version of that developed by female engineers, because the one made by male engineers for 150 fucking years has been causing completely unnecessary pain just because of misogynistic men who won't listen to women when they say that's negative in some way. Like, we fucking have to deal with it. We really, really have to fight misogyny everywhere we see it. We have got to dismantle the patriarchy. It is causing so much completely unnecessary harm. And then misogynistic men will turn around and say, why are women so, insert negative. I don't know, maybe they're upset because so many men insist on causing them harm and then minimizing that harm, whilst at the same time they will make a huge deal out of if a woman, was even mildly, even if she didn't do anything wrong, a misogynistic man will find something to, yeah. I think that covers the, yeah, so I hope that that's what Tarantino was doing there. I'm a tiny bit worried that maybe he's, because like in Reservoir Dogs, he had characters discuss this notion that black men are worse on their female partners than white men. And like, I'm not at all qualified to discuss the complexities of black masculinity, but I can definitely say, like, if you just look at the actual, like, stories from real life, there's countless cishet white men that are truly terrible to the women in their lives, including their partners. And again, it's just one of those things where, like, there's this saying, every accusation is a confession. They like to say, oh, other people are doing this thing, so that they and their friends and others who maybe do it, maybe just don't take it seriously when the people they respect do it. Yeah. And I think... So yeah, I'm a tiny bit worried that Mia is saying the fact that Marcellus is black means that he's going to be horrible to her if he finds out about this situation. But yeah, hopefully it is the other. I guess it's not impossible that there's some of both going on. Anyway, that brings us... Oh, I am absolutely not qualified to rate the actual dance moves that they do at Jackrabbit Slim's. I will just say it's entertaining to watch. And I think... Let's see. I think that brings us to the... So let's see. I forget what it's... Oh, the gold watch, maybe. Yeah. And yeah, I enjoy everything every time I see Christopher Walken in something. He's amazing. But this might be my favorite scene of his. Just the entire fucking thing is so fucking good. And again, you know, sadly, some racism. And I think it is the fact, like, you know, there are a number of veterans who continue for a long time hating the people they fought. And I understand that. I just think, you know, racism is not necessary. It's you know, and it's also one of those things. I think it was Renegade Cut who he was talking about the Rambo movies, but he pointed out that those movies, and you know, I forget if he himself personally made this point, but it definitely is something, you know, very true. There's a number of American movies and shows and such. They think the tragedy of the Vietnam War is how it affected Americans, not the way it affected the Vietnamese people. You know, keeping in mind, like, I'm not gonna go off on a huge history lesson here, but like, if you read up about it, it was really fucked up. Like, yeah, fucking imperialism. Like, so much harm has been done in the name of fighting communism, and yeah. Let's see. That brings us... What was the other thing? Let's see. Yeah, so the... Yeah, then we have the part where Butch, you know, wakes up right before the fight, and it's one of those things. I appreciate that we don't see the fight because it's like, it's not important, you know, like, it's not really something that we need to see. And apparently, so I forget if this was shot and left on the editing room floor, or if it was never shot, but like in the script or something. But apparently, originally, so yeah, Vincent talks about how, you know, he's really upset that his car got keyed, and you know, the Stoltz character, which is also underlining how much of an asshole he is, talks about how he thinks the person should be executed. There shouldn't even be a trial. Apparently, it was Butch who did it, and it was after them in the bar, you know, which, like, yeah, that makes so much sense. And it's, again, like, Vincent doesn't even stop to think, like, have I pissed off someone recently? Like, he thinks that he, you know, he's one of those guys. He thinks that he can just get away with being an asshole to everyone, and there will never be consequences. He might even become president one day. And yeah, it is, of course, I'm not going to spend forever on it, in part because I'm not spoiling that movie, but yeah, he is supposed to be related to a specific character from Reservoir Dogs, which, you know, you'll know their name if you watch that entire movie. But yeah, and you do see some aspects that they have in common, let's go with. That's not spoiling anything about that movie, but if you've watched that movie and this one, you'll know what I mean. Yes, that brings us to the, let's see. Yeah, what was the next thing? I guess it was, yeah, so he he gets in the cab, and you know, apparently she played a very similar character in something else, and Tarantino loved it, and so he put her in this, and she really is great. This whole thing about how, yeah, she's basically aroused by, learning about the killing, the details of, how he feels and such. And yeah, like, he is someone who doesn't really value human life particularly. Like he said, well, he shouldn't have gotten in the ring if he didn't want to end up dead. And I do appreciate, him killing, I want to say Maynard is, like, the guy's a rapist, so it is, I don't approve. I'm not saying I would want that to happen in real life. In real life, I very much believe that violence should always be the last resort. I'm not saying it's never necessary. It was necessary to stop the Nazis in World War II. It was necessary for Stonewall to happen for gay rights. It shouldn't have been, but it was. And yeah, you know, and with that said, rape is one of the single worst things that you could possibly do to another human being. And it's, it can be cathartic in fictional media to see violence done to them. Now, I think that brings us to, so yeah, Butch, and he gets on the phone to that other guy and talks about how, you know, the situation, and it's one of those things. I love when a movie can have a phone conversation like that, where we don't actually see the other person, we don't hear what they say. That kind of thing can come across corny. I'm not saying it always does. You can deduce what he said, because, like, clearly, at one point Butch is like, "You bet your fucking ass." So, obviously the other guy said something like, "You're a lucky motherfucker," or "You really have it made now, don't you?" or something like that. And he goes to the, yeah, and the thing about, he pays her for the fare, and he gives her a little extra money to a lie. And I love that before she makes clear that she's going to lie for him, she starts by, he asks, "What are you going to tell people about the fair tonight?" She says, "The truth." And for like a fraction of a second, we're like, "Oh shit." And then she goes out to lay out what she's going to claim as the truth. And it's like, oh, because like, we kind of want Butch to succeed, And I think that brings us, I think that's when we see so Vincent, back in his suit, goes to talk to Marcellus, and there's the thing about, well, seemingly the coach, trainer, whatever, doesn't know shit about what Butch did, where he is, rather, now that he's done it. And Mia saying, "I never thanked you. It was nice going out and eating with you," which, like, that is a, I think that brings us to, I think the relationship between Butch and Fabienne is one of those things where, like, obviously it is not 100% healthy. I do appreciate that there are a lot of people who live like that in the real world. And it's one of those things where I don't love that they are kind of making it seem like, well, as long as things go okay for him, he's not, I mean, he throws the fucking TV, not at her, but she's in the room, and then, when she apologizes afterwards, he doesn't immediately say, that she's forgiven. He doesn't even thank her for apologizing. He just, leaves and says, I'll be back soon. And but yeah, I do really appreciate that there are sweet moments there, and the subtle way that it is implied that she is pregnant. She talks about how she wants a pot belly. She wants everyone to see it, and someone also pointed to the fact that like her breakfast order sounds like something, it sounds like a food craving for like a pregnant, and she's like trying to tell him something, and then she's like, no, I can tell you tomorrow or something because he's asleep. And yeah, it seems very likely that is that she is pregnant. But right, he says, I'm gonna take a shower, I stink, and then she says, I like your stink. Find someone who likes the way you stink as your partner. Now, let's see. I feel like that pretty much gets us to the, yeah. It's I quite appreciate that, they both end up, performing oral sex on each other. And it's very typical guy that he, as soon as she asks if he'll do it for her, he asks, you'll do it for me too, right? Like, maybe it's not the worst thing in the world if you do it for her and she doesn't reciprocate. Like, maybe it could just be something you do because you want to make her happy. But I do appreciate that her asking first, somewhat changes the dynamic. She feels comfortable asking him for it, and it's clearly also not the first time that it's. And he does say, she asks, she says, you do me first, and he does. And let's see, right, and that's also something I am a very firm believer in. If you are a straight man, you're with a woman, either don't expect her to perform oral on you, or you be willing to perform oral on her as well. And let's see. That brings us, I think that might be the time where we have the thing about how she points out, we're in danger, aren't we? People will kill us if they find out about this. And that was also a bit where it felt very authentic. I don't know how delicate I want to be about this. He slides at least one finger into her to convey that he wants her. And she says, say it out loud. Say you want me. And that is such a, like, I'm not saying it was unique to this. There's other 90s media in America that, but it is, there is some truth to it, because a lot of men will think that them wanting a woman sexually is the highest honor they can bestow upon her. And a lot of women, like, I'm not saying there are no women who primarily want sex or that there's anything wrong with that, but a lot of women, they want to know that we're going to be there for them, that it's not just about sex. And, because, what's that line? Sex is lust in disguise, lust fades, and when that happens, you better be with someone who can stand you. R.I.P. Rob Reiner. But let's see. So they wake up and he notices the clock, the watch is not there. Right. I also like the thing about, teaching her a little bit of Spanish, and the thing about, what time is it? What time is it? It's time for bed. And yeah, him being an asshole, making fun of her, I forget, there was something that she like mispronounced or misunderstood or something, and he's just a complete asshole to her, you know. And again, you know, later is like throwing the TV, you know, really struggling to control his anger. Like he's clearly not, you know, 100% good guy. And yeah, I mean, there are a number of men out there who, you know, if they didn't have a strong male role model, and it doesn't have to be the biological father. And I'm also not like blaming single mothers. You know, a lot of them did not choose to be single mothers. It's just that there's a lot of men who refuse to raise someone else's children. You know, some children fathered by someone other than themselves, and then they'll turn around and say, oh, look at all these single mothers. Yeah, I mean, you could help fix that problem, but I guess you just want to be a fucking asshole instead. But the, yeah, you know, it definitely seems like Butch did not have a strong male role model, and now he values this fucking object more than her, you know, feeling safe around him. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe if his father had been around more instead of doing butt stuff with watches, but God damn it, I said I wasn't going to kink shame this video. Anyway, the yeah, I do feel like the dialogue is still well written. It just, you know, it's uncomfortable, and it is meant to be, you know, the way that, because he could just say, well, the watch isn't here. I'm gonna have to go get it. I'll be back as soon as I can. But he's like saying, do you think or do you know? What the fuck do you mean? What does that mean? You know, no, it's not here. It's clearly not here. I am looking for it. You know, all this shit. It's just like, yeah. I do appreciate that, you know, afterwards he is tender with her and asks, you know, what are you gonna eat for, what are you gonna get for breakfast? You know, and like, yeah. But yeah, it is very much showing, you know, I mean, and he even admits in the car that it was his own fault. He didn't say, or wait, or was it, ah, shit. No, I think he did he admit to her face, maybe. He said, you know, he should have done a better job making it clear why it was so important to him that she, you know, and that's, yeah, like, there's so many problems when it comes to straight couples where it's the man just not communicating with the woman. And to be clear, I'm not saying that that's always easy, because of socialization, not because of, you know, some men seem to think that, women are so difficult to communicate with. Not really. We're just, you know, kind of socialized to be bad at it. Yeah. And it's something that we have to unlearn so we can get good at it, so that we can have healthier relationships with the women in our lives. But yeah, the, let's see. So he, right, and the thing about, you know, I'll be back before you have time to say disestablishmentarianism, or Blueberry. Okay, maybe not quite that fast. And sounds a bit overqualified. But the, yeah, so they, yeah, so he, you know, he drives off and, you know, goes to the apartment, very quietly unlocks the door and goes in, you know, and decides to make Pop-Tarts because he didn't have time for breakfast and the, yeah. And I love that we don't immediately see, you know, something catches his eye. And he's standing there and he's just Bruce Willis's performance. And we're sitting there thinking, what the fuck is it? What did he see? And then, you know, we see, oh shit. Someone is here for him. And he picks up the gun. And then the door opens and it's fucking Vincent. God damn it, Vincent. You know, someone really should have told you, stop going to the bathroom in this movie, because shit goes down every single fucking time. You know, between, like, here, where it ends up getting him killed, there's the diner where, you know, I mean, ultimately that does work out, but it got really, really tense, in part because of the, yeah. And the, yeah, it's him in the bathroom is why he doesn't see Mia, you know, sniffing doing a line of the heroin. And I appreciate I'm not the first person to make the observation that shit goes down when he goes to the shitter. Yeah, so the but yeah, you know, and we even see, you know, he had like a book or something he was reading out there, you know, and there's several really tense seconds where he's just standing there menacingly, and then the Pop-Tarts pop tartly, and he shoots him, and yeah, he gets back in the car and drives, and then we see Marcellus, and it's like, oh shit, of course, like Marcellus, as best I can tell, was bringing food for the, is it called a stakeout if you're inside? I forget. But yeah, you know, and yeah, that's a, and he, like, I think the idea is he kind of recognizes the car because he knows which, well, and maybe also wasn't expecting anyone to be there at that hour or something like that, but, you know, turns around, sees him, and it's, yeah, really, really cool. And Butch, right, I also appreciate him saying, you know, we're in America. Our names don't mean anything. Really? Because Butch means, like, masculine, so, like, but that's how, you know, he doesn't like to communicate, maybe especially with women. But the, like, it's not even a bad thing. Like, it's not like he has a name that means something that doesn't fit or that he wouldn't like. He clearly likes being hypermasculine. He's a fucking boxer. But the right, I also appreciate it in the cab, his difficulty removing the boxing gloves by himself. From what I understand, you're supposed to get help with that. They're very difficult to take off without someone else helping you with it. Anyway, then the but yeah, you know, so he decides the best course of action is to run. Marcel is over, and then his car is hit by another car, because of course it fucking is. There was a red light, which means it's green for the others, you know, yeah. So very nicely done there. And, you know, LA, people drive fast, so yeah. And just the tension as, you know, so he crashes, and then, you know, Marcellus is waking up. I legit forgot. And I feel a little bad because you know, before she was canceled, I'm not making any excuses for, you know, the depiction of Trump that got her canceled, but, you know, before that, I used to really, really like, shit, my wrists are too bad to look it up right now. I believe her name is Kathy Griffin. You know, she's also in Four Rooms. But yeah, you know, I think it's because she's so different here and there than what I'm used to seeing. I want to say Ellen, wasn't she on sorry, am I remembering right? I think it is, isn't it just called Ellen, the sitcom Ellen DeGeneres had. Her I'm also not making any excuses for. Anyway, I'm just glad the truth came out. But the but yeah, so the let's see. Yeah, you know, so Marcellus wakes up and then draws the gun. And so I don't love the violence against women in this movie. I would argue that the only time you could really call it, like, gender specific or sexualized is the adrenaline into the heart. You know, that is, like, we are clearly meant to think of, you know, oh, those are, like, a woman's breasts are, like, sexual, you know, but other than that, like, yeah, you know, they might get shot or something, but so are the men. You know, it's not in a especially, you know, horrifying way. And yeah, so the and obviously I'm not saying, like, as great as it would be if there was true equality, there should be, but, you know, there isn't. It is, you know, worse to depict, but I do think the movie is making efforts to be even about it, where a lot of American movies will revel in violence against women. But yeah, and you know, you see him off in the distance and he's like wobbling because he just got hit by a fucking car, and so he keeps missing with the gun also, just like, yeah. And let's see, the yeah, I it's really great how, you know, one of them is like, you know, you got hit by a drunk driver and I'm totally gonna be a character witness for you, because like she's thinking, oh, this is just a regular guy, you know, she has no idea, you know, that this is, yeah. And he had something else in mind. And if he had actually just, like, hypothetically, let's say that he was like, hey, do any of you have a cell phone? We should call the cops and have him arrested. He wouldn't have ended up with Zed and Maynard. He wouldn't have. So I'm obviously not victim blaming a rape survivor. That is not what I'm doing here. I'm saying that the way the story is told, yeah, you know, him pursuing Butch is how they end up in that situation. And that's one of the places where, yeah, the tone kind of shifts, you know, and it's, I have to admit, I'm not, it's another of the, you know, B-movie plots that are apparently more frequent than, you know, I haven't personally watched very many B-movies that had that, but this idea of, you know, yeah, rapists just like hiding in plain sight almost, or being in, you know, yeah, not seen anything else with it, but it works really well here. Like, it makes it feel like this is a world where kind of every non-sci-fi, non-fantasy B-movie is happening or could just off screen, you know, and yeah, they stumble into this, like, you don't expect it at all. It's completely, yeah. And I think that is when, god damn it, I gotta speed this up at least a little bit. We're still, I've been going for almost as long as the movie is, and there's still the whole Bonnie situation, but yeah, so the yeah, they end up fighting inside, you know, and yeah, Maynard is immediately like, what the fuck is happening here, you know. And when Butch gets the gun from Marcellus and is about to shoot him, and Maynard is stopping him, yeah, at first we are thinking like, oh, you know, maybe Maynard is a decent person and he doesn't want, you know, because this is an execution, this is just fucking murder, you know, like, hypothetically, if Butch just like held a gun at Marcellus and said, if you follow me, I will use this, and then, you know, got a vehicle, left LA, that would have been it. But no, he wants to kill Marcellus, and Marcellus wants to kill him, and that's what gets them in this fucking situation. And let's see, then we have, yeah, and the yeah, Maynard gets Zed there and knocks out the boxer, which is an amusing way to deal with, you know, he doesn't punch him with his hands, but with the butt of the gun, but still, it is specifically that happens. But yeah, he gets Zed to come there, and I gotta say, I've seen Peter Green in other things, but when I think of him, it's always either this or The Mask, you know. And it's not like he is great in some of the other, let's see, I believe, isn't that him in Training Day? I'm pretty sure he's one of the, that he appears in that and does really well there as well. Anyway, moving on. So the yes, the, and again, we have these little mundane details, you know. Is it okay if Gracie is parked in front of the store? Well, it's not Tuesday, is it? No, it's Thursday, and it's fine, you know, because again, like, that's how you talk to your friends, you know. Am I parked okay, or is that going to be a problem, you know? Just, yeah. And we have another cop who is, you know, every so often, I'm not going to give away which, but sometimes Tarantino movies will indeed have at least one cop that is really not a good person. And I do appreciate that. It's important to call that out. And I guess we finally got an answer. You know, I and many other leftists have been wondering, what would it take for conservatives, prominent ones, I mean, to like really speak out against cops. And I don't remember his name right now, but there was one who threatened that, I mean, he very heavily implied that if indeed ICE officers are arrested by cops, then ICE will use violence against these cops. And keep in mind, this is coming on the heels of ICE. Again, I don't want to get sued. I hate the passive language, but ICE confronted a woman and she ended up dead. And apparently that's not supposed to have consequences. You know, there's now like a rule that says that, let's see, I think it's like if you're a congressperson, you can't visit an ICE facility if you haven't made an appointment a week before, which, like, I feel like that's probably not something that you have to do if you don't have something. Trying not to get sued here. There are certain circumstances under which you would want something like that to be the case, and I will leave it at that. But yeah, you know, then we have the, yeah, I don't even think I feel comfortable saying that word, but the one that's like BDSM. I want to say that I really appreciate this guy's performance because, like, he doesn't have a line, and we don't even see his face. You know, most of it at least. But his physical performance, like, there is an intensity to it. He really sells it very, very well. But yeah, this is technically still sometimes, you know, I'm not sure it's really mainstream yet, but, you know, yeah, when this was made, a lot of Americans, a lot of people in general thought that, oh, you know, BDSM, that's this horrible thing. And yeah, I mean, I can understand why if you don't really know anything about it. And I don't have personal experience with it. I just know what I hear from talented leftist YouTubers who are part of the community, such as Cat Black. But yeah, this is, you know, they're not, the BDSM community is not just like a bunch of fucking rapists, you know, assholes. Someone who's a member of the community, I'm afraid I do not know their name, but they pointed out technically there's less rape in BDSM than with vanilla because a lot of vanilla couples don't communicate, and so consent is not respected or even expected. Whereas in BDSM, and it's in part of necessity, but they do, you know, there are some people who do not respect consent, but they get unpopular within the community and then struggle to find anyone, and I'm going to use their exact words here, to play with. But yeah, and it's also just like, you really didn't need that in there. Like, I mean, okay, if you need a striking visual, I don't know, priest maybe. You know, there's a problem in a lot of conservative churches where priests are rapists, sometimes pedophiles, and are not held accountable. I remember hearing one story where the rape survivor, who was underage, was forced to apologize to the priest for him raping her. So I feel like that would have, yeah, but it is a problem. There are a lot of people who don't understand that sexual perversion does not mean someone is a rapist. And yeah, I think that does cover that. I do appreciate the detail that because he, let's see, if he wasn't wearing the mask that keeps him from, really, like he can sort of scream, but not really coherently, because of that, he's unable to call for help as Butch is freeing himself, And right, I love the let's see, is it slow motion or frame something? But the possible frame rate thing. But as the door is being closed with Marcellus in there and Butch outside, really, really impactful. And yeah, we all know what's happening in there even before we see it. And at first, Butch is going to leave. He opens the door to the outside and catches himself. And yeah, at the end of the day, like, he just can't let that happen. Even though he and Marcellus was trying to kill each other, right before this happened. And he still hates Marcellus. And he's not expecting, this will, like, he doesn't seem surprised when he just needed Marcellus to say out loud, yeah, as long as you fuck off and I never hear from you again, yeah, I'm not going to pursue you further. Now, I think that does bring us to the yeah, and he goes over multiple potential weapons, and others have already pointed out there might be some hints there towards other Tarantino movies. And then yeah, he goes in, and the fact that, so Marcellus realizes that Butch is there, and then, Maynard realizes, Marcellus is looking at someone, and so he turns around, and we get that wonderful classic gag that also really shows that Tarantino has watched a lot of these, cheesy movies where if someone is attacked with a sword, we don't see, we see them from behind, and we see the sword slash, and then they turn to face the camera, and then we see, the blood on the shirt, maybe even like a wound, there. But, it's very easy to do when you are working out the, what's the word? The filmmaking of just having, yeah, you just have to time it right, and the blood is already there on the shirt before the sword is moved at all, and they just have to make sure that you can't see that the sword is not making contact. And so then when he turns around and acts like he was just sliced, it's convincing, and it's, yeah, I love, it's such a, yeah. And it's also the kind of thing you don't even really think about the first time you watch it. It's on repeat viewing that you're like, I can't actually see the sword strike, so presumably that's how they did it, yeah. And then, you have this fun kind of neo-Western, it's almost like a quick draw, it's like, you're going to go for the gun, aren't you? Go ahead, go for the gun, while he's holding the sword. And it's like, can you aim and fire faster than I can slice, And I think it works really well that you don't see too much that Marcellus is moving. You just, because like, yeah, as soon as Zed, stops raping, then, Marcellus can go over there and get the shotgun, and yeah, he makes a very clear threat, which apparently, let's see, I think it was the word pipe hitters was misunderstood. And yeah, I believe it's IMDb trivia that has the details about that. So I'm not gonna, I don't really have anything to add to what was written there. And I think that does bring us to, yeah. And so, he got a new vehicle and goes and picks up Fabienne. And yeah, it's so silly that he's like, it's not a motorcycle, it's a chopper. Whose motorcycle is this? It's not a motorcycle, it's a chopper. Whose chopper is this? And I think that does bring us right. I like, it's just a detail, like the fact that she is, brushing her teeth as he's trying to teach her Spanish, and then he's like, "Oh, you should spit. I can barely make out the words you're saying," kind of thing. And yeah, the closest we get to a right off into the sunset happy ending is Butch and Fabienne. And it is very clear that he does care about her. And I'm not saying that that excuses, he still, like, if I met people in that situation in real life, I would probably talk to her, maybe away from him, and say, you should probably make sure to have an escape plan, have a support network. If you feel threatened by him, you don't have to accept that. And but yeah, so that's one aspect of it. And another is he went back to save someone that, yeah, that even though he hates them, I'm not sure I can imagine Vincent doing that. And yeah, Fabienne doesn't really, I don't know, I guess you could say she's forgetful, but she's not a bad person. She wants to be wanted. She wants to build a life with him. Right, I also like him noting, it's not like we're going to be able to live in luxury for the rest of our lives, but we'll be fine. And I think that does bring us to the Bonnie situation. So yeah, when that starts is when we realize there is a non-linear timeline here, because we're going back maybe an hour of film, and then later it's like 90 minutes of film or something, when the diner. And yeah, like, it puts certain things into perspective. I already mentioned it helps explain why Vincent is so fucking angry, but and explains the shirts that they're wearing. But yeah, I'm not gonna be able to add much new, if anything, to the discussion. Others have already done a really solid job of explaining. I'll just summarize. Basically, it is this thing of, it seems like there was an act of God. They were being called upon to change their ways, and by the end, Jules does, and Vincent doesn't. He refuses to believe that this is an act of God, and doesn't leave the life. Jules might have been shot. Like, that was a submachine gun. If Jules had been at Butch's apartment, he would have been shot. Very likely. It's not impossible he would have also been able to wound, maybe even fatally shoot Butch, but he himself might have been wounded fatally. And yeah. Anyway, so I quite like, so in the first part of the movie, we're like, oh, this is so cool with the Bible quote, which apparently is from a B movie. At again, Tarantino showing his love for other films. But when we see the guy in the bathroom, yeah, at one point he's like reacting to the Bible quote, is like, what the fuck? And that is kind of where, I found myself watching it thinking, yeah, I guess it is kind of, yeah. And by the end, Jules has indeed deconstructed it. He's acknowledging, I just thought it was cool. God damn it. Do I represent evil men right now, But yeah, let's see. So I do also appreciate Vincent pointing out, we should probably talk about this in the car rather than in jail. If they stay there, like, there was gunfire, the cops are probably already on their way. And yeah, so they're driving away from there, and they talk about it, and the yeah, Jules is convinced, Vincent is reluctant, and so I live in Denmark. I do not have a gun. I never have. I probably never will, but almost definitely never will. But I have heard some of like safety training for guns, and literally one of the first things they say is, do not point your gun at something you do not want to shoot. And Vincent breaks that rule, and yeah. There was actually some years back, there was a parody of the Bonnie situation where it was Dick Cheney who, yeah, I don't know. Do I have to say more? Is it obvious what it's about based on that? I guess it's been years, so maybe people have forgotten. But yeah, Dick Cheney shot a guy, and then the guy apologized to him. But yeah, I'm not necessarily saying that it's like a wonderful thing to make jokes about, but yeah, just noting it exists. Anyway, but yeah, some have interpreted this as, this is God saying, Vincent, I swear to me. And yeah, they end up in this, really fucked up situation. Some would say it's because Vincent doesn't believe that this is a miracle. I think, obviously a big part of it is the fact that he was pointing the gun, like, just put the fucking gun away. What are you even having the gun out for still? Like, you're not expecting to be able to have to shoot anybody anytime soon, And I do appreciate, they do actually, like, if you look, you might not notice this on the first viewing, but this time I paid very close attention. Yeah, you do see his finger pull the trigger. And it's not like, I don't know, it's not impossible that there maybe is like a bump in the road or something, or maybe he just wasn't thinking, maybe he's just so used to responding with violence to so many situations. But yeah. And let's see. So yeah, they go to Jimmy's, and we get one of the few scenes where we actually see Mia and Marcellus, at the same time, and they aren't actually talking to each other. They're just both in the same place at the same time. Same as in the basement, I think it was, where Marcellus and Vincent talk about Butch. But but yeah, so the let's see. Yeah, Winston, obviously one of the best characters here. One of the best Tarantino characters in general. Not the only time. Cartel, A, did amazing work for and with Tarantino. B, played a character like this. And this is also one of those characters that's big in popular culture. There is even a Predator version of the Wolf. It's in a shitty movie, but it does help show, yeah, like there's genuinely a lot of, it's made an impact. And I think, doesn't that pretty, let's see. I think that brings us, yeah, the entire thing with, yeah, so Jackson on the phone with, yeah, having Ving Rhames and Samuel Jackson interact at all is just so fucking cool. And as soon as he says wolf, he's like, well, that's all you had to say, and okay, so let me get straight the names. And like he writes down one body, no head. And he's like, That's 30 minutes away. I'll be there in 10. And then it says, 9 minutes and 37 seconds later. And the and he talks to Jimmy, and he's so clearly in charge that when he, and I mean, he is polite, but Jimmy has just gotten done saying, I don't care about what's on my fucking mind right now is not the coffee in my fucking kitchen. But as soon as Wolf is like, hey, can I have a cup of coffee? He's like, yeah, sure. How do you take it? Just, yeah. Right, and the whole thing with the washing the hands, like, what the fuck did you do? There's blood all over this fucking towel, You saw me wash my hands. I saw you wet them. I washed my hands with the same soap you used. And, and yeah, like, it's this thing of like, yeah, it's a black man yelling at a white man, but he's right. This could really fuck things up for them, and it's the white guy being a complete asshole. Like, yeah, what the fuck are you doing? Do you not know how to wash your hands? I'm sorry, are you fucking 4? Jesus Christ. And okay, so obviously I have heard that it is more difficult to wash blood off than many other things, but like, make a fucking effort. Like, you're waiting for the wolf. Why not just take your time and properly wash your hands? Like, it would be one thing if, like, oh, there's a knock at the door, that must be the wolf. But no, he's, this is several minutes before the wolf arrives. So yeah, the let's see. I like the detail that there is, like, I don't know, maybe brain matter in some of Jules's hair, visible, maybe especially right after Marvin was shot. And I think that does bring, yeah, and this is especially where you see how Vincent he's such a fucking baby about, like, I don't know, I think, maybe be a little bit more polite. Like, I just hope Jimmy isn't gonna be a jerk to me. Like, you mean the Jimmy that you brought a headless corpse to the home of 90 minutes before his wife comes home? Like, are you fucking kidding me right now? And he's also, he talks to Jules, and he's like, I'm sorry, do you not get that when you say that you're sorry and you admit that you did something wrong, the other person's supposed to just forgive you without any questions asked? Like, oh my God. Jesus Christ. I don't agree with everything that Tarantino has ever said or done, but I am so fucking glad that Vincent here is a cishet white man, because, my God, if you read his lines on a piece of paper and you didn't know, you'd probably say, this is a cishet white man, isn't it? Like, holy shit. I'm not sure I've met anyone quite as bad as him, but, like, America is currently being run by one. So, okay, to be clear, I'm not saying that Trump would, like, shoot someone, but, he's responsible for a lot of truly evil things. And for no reason other than just personal, personal gain. I'm not saying I want anything bad to happen to him, but I think if you don't yet oppose him, you should really question, what is it that's making you still, like, I mean, you can be far right without supporting him, right? Like, you can stop short. Now, I think that might bring us, let's see. Yeah, Wolf, like, every single thing he says, the little, the little smile, and the yeah, I fucking love when he says, excuse me, after Vincent says, you could say please. And yeah, part of why he's so fucking cool is he's right. Like, everything he says, it makes sense. This is such just a completely absurd situation. Like, how could you possibly fucking fix this? But he manages, it's completely ridiculous. And even, and Jimmy comes in and says, okay, so I got you the sheets and all that stuff. I don't know about this, man. I mean, this was a wedding present, and the people who got it for us are dead, so they can't give us another one, and he's like, well, Marcellus will get you new ones, instead of, like, there's so many Tarantino characters, and I've mentioned before, I do think he is trying to criticize machismo, but there's a lot of Tarantino characters who would just, like, say, what the fuck are you talking to me about that for? Instead, he's just like, well, here's how we're going to solve that. And the the thing in the car, the conversation, and Vincent is still like, I'm a victim here, and Jules is like, you know what, you take care of the fucking brain matter and skull, I'm gonna clean the windows instead. And I think that brings us to so then it's, cleaning them. And I like the thing about, they look like dorks. These are your clothes. This is your scarf. And they end up getting out of there. And I like the thing about, okay, you follow me, drive fast, because I do. Oh, and if there's a scratch on the car, Joe will be disposing of 2 bodies, not just 1. Jesus Christ. And yeah, I like that you actually kind of get a sense of who Raquel is, even though she has very little dialogue or screen time, The thing about, say goodnight, Raquel. Goodnight, Raquel. And, he won't drive them there because of where they live, and yeah. And yeah, I think that does bring us to the diner, the very last scene. And yeah, the moment that you realize, suddenly it cuts to Tim Roth saying, "Garçon, coffee." And we know exactly what is, and it's like, oh shit. Because up until that exact moment, on the first viewing, we think, oh, it's like an entree. It's like, it's a cocktail before the meal kind of thing. This is just like telling us this is what the world you're going to spend the next 2 hours, 20 minutes in is like. We're not expecting there to be anything, it doesn't feel like it needs payoff. It's just saying this is that world, and that would work fine. Like, if that last scene wasn't there, like, people wouldn't hold the movie in as high regard, but we wouldn't be thinking, what the fuck happened with those two, We spend so much of the movie needing to see more of them without knowing it. And yeah, more conversation about whether or not it's a miracle. And Vincent being really judgmental, saying you'd be, a bum. And I do think it is noteworthy that he would rather be a killer than, I'm going to use the word homeless instead, and yeah, didn't he say those assholes who beg for change? Like, yeah, because you're such a fucking wonderful person yourself. Like, there's nothing wrong. So many of the people, I don't remember the exact percentages. If you really badly want to know, you can look it up for yourself. But quite a lot of the people who are homeless, it's through no fault of their own. They didn't do anything wrong. They ended up there because of fucking capitalism, because of greedy, CEOs and such would rather enrich themselves than actually help people. And we should be judging those people, not the homeless people. And let's see. Yeah, I love details such as just the fact that we're actually seeing them, we see Jules eat some of the stuff, and we see Vincent preparing. Like, I don't know exactly what it is. He's like there's something he's spreading on those, I want to say they're pancakes or something, you know, just like to have something more visual there. And yeah, suddenly the, you know, Pumpkin and Honey Bunny are robbing the place. And I love the little Rashomon thing of, you know, she says it's slightly different. It's the same message being conveyed. Let's see. I think it's so in the start she says, "I'll execute every motherfucking last one of ya," and then here at the end she said, "I'll execute every last of you motherfuckers," or something along those lines. So it's distinctly different. And I've seen people who say, "Oh, you know, I guess they didn't pay close enough attention to the editing suite." I don't think that's the case. I think it is. One of the things is it's telling us this is a perspective shift. That this is now Jules', you know, version of events that we've gone to. Like, the opening scene is very clearly from the perspective of Pumpkin and Honey Bunny. They don't even know about the briefcase and these two killers in the, yeah. And it's also such a wonderful, because like they're at the start, they talk about like, well, there's probably not going to be very many heroes in a diner. Like, yeah, obviously. And the first time you see the scene, you're like, I mean, I don't approve. You know, it's out of line, but right. And then there at the end, no, that was one of the worst places, but purely because of, you know, and then again, like, is this still like act of God? Because like Jules walks away alive. And yeah, you know, if not for, you know, the act of God early in the movie, then yeah, like Jules would almost definitely have, let's see, I imagine Jules would have shot Ringo, and I'm not sure he would have been fast enough to shoot Yolanda before she at least fatally wounds him. And, you know, then maybe Vincent finishes off Yolanda, and I'm not sure he's going to be able to get Jules to a hospital, you know. And hypothetically, if Vincent hadn't gone to the toilet, I can imagine both pairs would, you know, shoot at each other, shoot at the other pair at the same time, and maybe all four end up dead. I appreciate that. Let's see, I think it's Lawrence Bender, the producer, who's, you know, long-haired yuppie scum, just as the one of the characters, basically, you know, yeah, and the guy who's like the manager says, "I'm not a hero. I am a coffee shop," you know, and then Ringo cuts him off, and the end credits does refer to him as coffee shop. I mean, that's the title he gave himself. I don't know what you want. And yeah, the whole, you know, we see Jules ready the gun under the table, again, very, you know, Western. And Ringo goes over, and it's only once the briefcase is, you know, he hands over the wallet, no problem, no questions asked. Also appreciated the thing about, you're not gonna leave the bloody clothes out for the garbage man, right? But yeah, only when he had, you know, the briefcase, and he opens it and under threat and says, you know, "This isn't mine. I can't let you have this." And that's when, you know, when Ringo refuses that, that's when when Jules makes his move. And yeah, like this entire scene, it goes on for a little while, and it is so fucking tense throughout. And yeah, you genuinely find yourself, I mean, okay, so we know that Vincent is going to survive because we saw his death already, but like hypothetically, the other three might end up dead. Jules wasn't there where Vincent died in the Gold Watch, you know. But yeah, the whole conversation and the way he manages to de-escalate the situation. So I don't love that he uses the B word about Yolanda and is like shouting and such, but he is having a gun pointed at him, and it is definitely necessary for him to do something. He needs to get the situation back under control, or she will shoot. She said as much. And I also really appreciate that before Jules makes his move, we do see they do really know what they're doing. They've done this before. You know, she gets there's that bad angle that she wouldn't be able to control them in, so she gets them to go into a place where she can keep an eye on them. And right in the detail that, you know, there's the thing about, you know, are you okay? And she says, I have to pee. Because like, yeah, she's scared. You know, that's the kind of thing that, yeah. And I guess, okay, so I'll just very briefly acknowledge, just so no one feels the need to put it in the comment section. Yes, obviously, in the Star Wars movies that Sam Jackson appears in, he is not particularly playing a version of this. I think an argument can be made that it's in some ways subversion, because people were, by then, you know, that was what they thought of Sam Jackson as. But yeah, moving on. The yeah, at one point Vincent comes out, and then he of course throws, you know, gasoline on the fire that Jules is doing a good job putting out by saying, you know, the thing about principle. And it's like, Jesus Christ, it's not even your fucking money. And it's also, you know, that is one place where I do appreciate. So I'm not a Christian myself, never have been, never will be. You know, I really, at this point in my life, I used to be an anti-theist, which, for those who don't know, is an atheist who really, really can't stand religion and religious people. At this point, I take issue with conservatives, whether or not they are religious, especially cishet white male conservatives. And I do consider conservative Christianity, especially in America, to be responsible for a lot of harm. But I do appreciate, you know, this is very Christian. He's talking about, you know, he's going to abandon the harmful life he has, and he's going to go and, you know, yeah, like what he describes sounds Jesus-y, Christian, unless that Christian is also a Republican, in which case they're more likely to be, you know, Old Testament. I know I've said it before. I will definitely say it again. If you aren't going to try to follow the virtues of Christ, I don't think you should call yourself a Christian, because you're really just trying to get, you know, people who do actually hold Jesus in high regard to think more highly of you. And if you're not gonna actually try to live up to that, I mean, obviously no one can fully live up to it, not just because some of it contradicts other stuff, but at least try. You know, I was raised to be an atheist, but my parents did point out the positives of Jesus, and I have always tried to, especially, you know, love my neighbor and treat others as I would want them to treat me, you know. Anyway, I think that does... Yeah. So, you know, one of the things is he gives up all his earthly possessions. You know, or I suppose not necessarily all of them, but, you know, $1,500 in his wallet. He gives it to Ringo and says, leave without the briefcase and you can keep this, you know. And I do also appreciate that is an interesting way to handle it, because, like, hypothetically, he could just say, you're both going to put your guns down. We're going to wait here until the cops arrive. But no. And it would also be pretty hypocritical, because, like, after all, you know, they seemingly only kill people if they feel they have to in order to rob a place. You know, are two killers really going to judge them for that? Like, you know, they don't even know all the people they kill. And they're killing just because they're being paid by Marcellus to do it. Now, I think that does pretty much... Yeah, I really love the deconstruction of, you know, he recites it's the third time that we hear the entire Bible verse, and the second time in maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And he actually goes and says, what does this mean? And yeah, because it is clear that, like, it could so easily be just, this is something cool. I think, from what I understand, I don't think I've watched the movie that it originated in, but the B movie that the Tarantino got that quote from, as far as I can tell, it is just they thought it was cool, and yeah, I think that does bring right. And seeing Sam Jackson and Tim Roth, interact like that is also really cool. And both of them have guns, and it is this thing of like trying to resolve it without violence. And yeah, that is the entire movie. Okay, so I'm just real quickly mentally gonna fast forward through the entire thing. I do not think that there is anything left that I have not said. Let's see. The yeah, just the fact that you have characters here who are not themselves criminals, and they might meet criminals, but that's basically it. I mean, Butch is a boxer, Fabienne is his partner. You have the cab driver. I mean, Mia knows about Marcellus's business. She doesn't seem to participate in it herself, just accepts that it is happening. And the yeah, I mean, the drug dealer and his wife and the girl that is there with, they don't seem to, okay, so he's dealing drugs, but outside of that, they don't seem like they're violent criminals, for example. And yeah, there's a good diversity of, there was some diversity. There was multiple ages and generations represented in Reservoir Dogs, but here, yeah, like there's so many different ones, and the way we're seeing these stories play out, and the way that, yeah, Vincent keeps fucking things up by not being sufficiently careful. Jules accepts that he should stop doing what he's doing. Butch fights to get out of the life. Yeah. And the way that, okay, so again, very important to make clear, I'm not victim blaming. I'm not saying anybody at all, under any circumstances, deserves. Literally, it is impossible to deserve rape. That is simply not something that could ever, under any circumstances, happen. When it happens to Marcellus, it is a reversal, because usually he is the one getting others hurt, and sometimes directly hurting people themselves. Like when he is first raped, it's like maybe 2-3 minutes of screen time after running time after we saw him attempt to shoot Butch. So the yeah, I think that does pretty well cover. It's also very impressive the way that, so there's basically 3 stories here, and all of them feel complete, even though none of them by themselves reach feature length. Obviously, otherwise this would have been significantly longer. And the way that they do, all have something to say about this world and the people in it. And yeah, like Vincent is someone who doesn't need to be pushed that much before he'll do something that he clearly shouldn't, and sometimes he'll even say, like, what the fuck am I doing? Butch, you know, when all you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, so he responds with violence when he shouldn't, but is also clearly trying to be good, which is something I do appreciate. A lot of cishet white men can definitely relate to Butch. And Jules, you know, yeah, like this thing of like we should all be willing and capable to reassert, you know, the yeah, I think that covers everything. I am not gonna quote every single line I love because all of them are in the IMDb memorable quotes section. If I mentioned every music track that I love, then I would just be listing every song that appears. I suppose I'll briefly say I think some of the best is the one they sing, the dance to. Let's see. You Never Can Tell. Chuck Berry, I want to say. I know it's one of the ones my dad really loves from his youth, and we listened to together when I was a kid. And the let's see, the one that plays as she's starting to OD, I think, you know, Girl, You'll Be a Woman Soon or something, really works. And let's see, I think that might cover, I feel like there's something remaining, but I am not entirely sure. Yeah, maybe that is everything. Let's see. Yeah, I and the video has certainly been going for plenty. Thank you so much if you're still watching. I truly do appreciate your viewership. Yeah, the yeah. Yeah, I do really think that it is, you know, I appreciate that Jules, you know, has this revelation, and yeah, you know, it is clearly part of what the movie is headed towards and trying to convey to us, you know, and yeah, like I guess I've already said, you know, we really have to be open to, you know, like if you're doing the exact same thing for a really long time in your life, you might end up thinking that it's the only way to do a thing, and you might become numb to harm that it maybe does. I'm not saying that's always the case, but it's a good idea to, you know, every so often in your life really take stock and be like, you know, is this working? Is this the best? You know, I firmly believe, to go full lefty on you, life is about growing, changing, and bettering, you know? Growing plants, changing diapers if you're a parent, and bettering your high score in arcade games.